So I'm standing here on the railroad tracks that are right next to the town of Peterton, or actually in the town of Peterton, I guess you'd say. And they are really important. They're here for a reason, and very important to what happened for the growth of this town, and then why it disappeared. So the railroads needed coal, and this town became a mining town for coal, and they built a railroad right through the town so they could get to coal to basically Topeka and to the larger cities to get to the railroads. And so through the late 1800s, Peterton had a boom, you could say, and most everyone who lived here were miners. And then as that declined into the 1900s, and then the miners started moving to other places where there was work, and Peterton became mostly an agricultural area. And then when the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, that pretty much was the end of Peterton. Now, as you drive around or walk around, there's only a few kind of farmhouses here and the railroad. So the railroad obviously looks like it's still active and runs right next to Peterton. We're about a mile or so down a dirt road off the main road, so there's really no reason for anyone to come to Peterton anymore, except it is a kind of another beautiful little agricultural area that used to have quite a few more people than there is now. In the town of Miller, which is, as you walk around Miller, if you are interested in this subject of visiting some of these places, this is a pretty cool one to visit. Lots of old buildings still around. Very quiet area. The town really didn't become the town until in the early 1900s, which makes it a fairly young town for a lot of these places that you end up going and seeing. So it never became incorporated, so it was always a small town, but it did have a time where it was growing, and then the economic depression of the 1930s, and then fires, which were very common back in the early 1900s. Fires destroyed much of the town, and back then they didn't have fire departments in every town, and so that kind of was probably hit it at the time it was most vulnerable. And so but after that, years after that, this little area built a really nice fire department, and they wanted to make sure it wasn't gonna happen to the town again. So they have a very nice fire department for a very small unincorporated community, and so kind of a cool little town in Miller. Never became a big town, but it's still here, and there's still, it appears, a proud community of people taking care of it. Arvonia, Kansas, and this is a really interesting, cool place. I would recommend, before I get started, I'd recommend anyone to come and visit. Like I mentioned in previous videos, the definition of ghost town, usually is a crumbling town that's on its way out. And Arvonia, while it used to be much bigger, it certainly has some people that care about it a lot and have taken care of it, and you'll see have restored many things here. And I was fortunate to just get a tour, so you get to see inside some of the buildings in Arvonia here. And I'm standing here in front of the church, which is a good place to start. Arvonia was a Welsh area. There was a railroad that was promised 3 times to come through Arvonia, and as we've talked about in previous videos as well, if they didn't have a railroad come through your town, you pretty much were in trouble. It's also right on Melbourne Lake, so I'm going to take the drone up, and I think you'll see how absolutely beautiful this area is. And if you ever have a couple hours and you're not too far from Arvonia, I would highly recommend to stop by and check it out. Final stop of the day. This is Silkville. Very, very interesting story. So the last place we were in, Arvonia, was a Welsh, kind of a colony, and this was started by somebody from France. His name was Ernest de Bossier, and Ernest seemed like a very interesting guy, kind of a political figure, or had some significant political thoughts, and started to disagree with some people in France in the mid-1800s when Napoleon III took over power. And so he was advised to leave the country. It was so significant. He went to New Orleans, and then after New Orleans, he ended up coming here and starting a town called Silkville because he wanted to start silk production. It was the first place in Kansas to produce silk. And so you got that going. You got a bunch of people from France to come over, and they started a town. And this was where it was started, right here in this basically rural area now. And so they were producing silk. Ernest had a kind of a socialistic view on politics, and everybody, should kind of have the same. And so when the guys from France came over to work here, and then they started learning English and talking to their American neighbors, they found that they can make more money elsewhere. And so that proved difficult for Ernest to keep up with. And then other places started producing silk once they found out they could do it here in Kansas. And so that really was the beginning of the end for him for silk. But Ernest persevered, and he started making cheese and wine, kind of stereotypical Frenchman here in America. And that was very successful. And so he was able he was quite an interesting guy, was able to do a lot of things here. And then he got into his 80s and he decided he'd had enough of this. He wants to move back to France. And so when he moved back to France, Silkville kind of died with it. And so now all that's left at all here is this old school building. another interesting thing about Silkville that maybe people didn't quite know exactly if it was happening was Ernest was this kind of share everything, like I kind of mentioned, socialistic. He had kind of a communal feel or communal thoughts, and so there were rumors there was a lot of free love going on in Silkville, and it's hard to know if that really happened, but in the 1800s, if that was going to happen, it wouldn't be hard to keep it a secret. So who knows what was going on here in Silkville.